Well, hi there. I took a break for August on my main channel, meaning I didn't make any August video, but you got 2 videos from me on July, so it all evens out. With that said, during my break, I managed to travel across some parts of Western Europe with my friends, and since rating and commenting about cities you've been to on vacation is not at all annoying or utterly pointless and pretty much no one cares, I've made such a video. Expect me to mispronounce every word I say, and also the rating system means utterly nothing. Let's begin. We start off in Bratislava, and since this is my home city, I'm not going to rate it as 7 out of 10 or something like that. From there, me and my friends pass Vienna, and we all agree it's pointless to go visit it since we live right next to it and have seen it a million times, and just as Bratislava, I'm not going to rate it something dumb like 8.5 out of 10. After a bit of traveling across northern Austria, the first real stop is Salzburg, a very important historical trading port on the river Salzach, which drains to the Danube. Salzburg at the start mainly traded in salt, hence its name Salzburg, Salt Fortress. There's so much to say about this city. It's very close to the Austrian Lake District, which is stunning. It has beautiful waterfront around the main river and a castle looking over it all. Throughout history, it was one of the most important bishoprics in Eastern HRE, and it has a beautiful cathedral to prove it. However, this trip is very long and there's not enough time to talk about everything. We have to move on. So Salzburg, 8.6 out of 10. After some more farting, we arrive in the capital of Bavaria, the city of Munich. I didn't have large expectations for Munich. After all, it's a big German city, so I thought it was going to be all business and no fun, but I was wrong. Unlike some other cities in Germany, Munich decided to stick with the old architecture theme when rebuilding after the war, which created this very nice city with a beautiful large park, old-timey buildings, and just an overall nice area to walk around with a delight. Historically, Munich was the capital of the Bavarian Kingdom and one of the most important cities in medieval HRE. It was controlled mostly by the Wittelsbach royal family and was a Catholic stronghold in a more Protestant-leaning Germany. Munich overall gets a 8 out of 10. From there, we travel to a small medieval island town of Lindau on the lake of Bodensee Obersee, or something else, I don't know, this name sounds made up. Anyway, Lindau was beautiful. Old cobblestone streets everywhere, colorful old buildings, and to top it all off, a stunning blue lake everywhere you look. The harbor looked amazing, the small streets looked amazing, the only problem it had was that it was too small. I wanted to see more of it. In the end, Lindau, 8.7 out of 10. From Lindau, it was just a quick skip through the mountains to the city of Zurich, situated on the northern bank of the Zurich Sea. I've been to Zurich before, but I actually never had time to check out its old center. Nonetheless, I was expecting a small historic center with few old buildings and that's it, especially because Zurich isn't that big of a city. But Zurich is old, like predating the Romans old. Therefore, it shouldn't be surprising that the historic center was pretty sizable. The lakefront with the park next to it was very nice, especially in the heat of the summer, and the old city with the cobblestone streets looked lovely. The old town lacked any breathtaking buildings like Vienna has, for example, but put together as a whole it was very nice. Plus it was interesting learning about the history of Zurich from the influential Roman era to the Swiss Confederation and beyond. Overall, 8.5 out of 10 for Zurich. The next day we left the land of mountains and high prices for the land of no English and baguettes. First town in France we visited was the OG Orleans, or Orléans, or however ridiculously you want to say it. I didn't expect much from Orleans because other than Joan of Arc helping to relieve a British siege of the city, I never heard of it before. But wow, was I surprised. This city with its old town, wide marbled streets and buildings with flags everywhere and an absolutely beautiful cathedral was probably the biggest surprise of this trip. The town hall looked amazing from outside and inside, same with the cathedral, and I even got to see the house that Joan of Arc stayed in while she was here. The city also has a very nice park with butterflies, which I managed to get in slow motion, and lastly, if you ever visit the city, go to the art museum just next to the cathedral. It holds probably one of the most famous paintings of Joan of Arc and many other beautiful art pieces. Orleans, 8.5 out of 10. From Orleans, we undertook a treacherous journey north to a land called Normandy, and we traveled across many small picturesque towns with beautiful stone houses. It was a joy to drive through these towns and countryside. But at the end of the driving, we came across something which can only be described as Tolkien-esque, but this was real. An island fortress upon a hill surrounded by kilometers of just sand as far as the eye can see. But then the high tide comes in, and in an hour it's all submerged under the English Channel. This place, as you may have guessed, is Mont Saint-Michel, and the area around it can have an up to 15-meter difference between low and high tide. Before I say anything about this, I expected it to be bigger. I don't know why, but in pictures on the internet it looks bigger. With that said, it's still very big. I just, for some reason, expected it to be huge. Nonetheless, it's a monastery built up on a hill with a town that grew around it to support the clergy that lived there. Obviously, it didn't look exactly like this throughout history, and there were many iterations of this famous fortress, but you have to admit it's a great location for a monastery. Continuing onwards, it has a street that resembles Diagon Alley, and the Harry Potter references don't stop there. The whole thing from the outside looks like Hogwarts. It has a huge fireplace that could easily be used to travel by flue powder, and most of the hallways, courtyards and mess halls look like from Harry Potter. But I digress, my geeky self. Mont Saint-Michel is absolutely beautiful. If you're there during low tide, I highly recommend walking around the island to get some amazing views of the monastery. Also, if possible, go all the way up the monastery during the sunset, because that was also very beautiful. Probably one of my top experiences in life was walking around Mont Saint-Michel, listening to How to Train Your Dragon soundtrack, all while the sun was setting over the water. Saint-Michel, 9.6 out of 10. From there, under the cover of night, we traveled to Saint-Malo, a fortified medieval port absolutely essential to the trade of the medieval kingdom of Brittany. Saint-Malo has a very seafaring past, with pirates, explorers and sailors all calling it home at one point or another. And since it was so essential for trade to Brittany and then France, its walls were huge and quite formidable, and today they hold very Victorian style houses within them. Actually, I was surprised by how modernish it looked within the walled city. Nonetheless, the city was very nice, but there wasn't anything that would really stand out other than the giant walls surrounding it. So Saint-Malo, 7 out of 10 for me. From Saint-Malo, we went to a town called Nantes, which if I showed a picture of, looks like a town in England, but was actually at one point the capital of Brittany. It grew up around the Larens River as a very important medieval trading port, but eventually the river and Nantes port became too small for the volume of trade needed, and so the city upstream, aforementioned Saint-Malo, became the main trading town, while Nantes center was moved from the riverbanks to within the newly constructed medieval walls just west of the river. And this is where Nantes center is today. It's a very well preserved medieval town with old wooden buildings and cobblestone streets, all still surrounded by the old fortifications. Its cathedral is also very nice, but it's not Orleans. Nonetheless, this city is a very pretty small capsule of medieval Brittany, and therefore it gets 8.1 out of 10. From there we traveled to Rennes, the current capital of Brittany. Unlike Nantes, Rennes combines old with new. It still has old buildings, nice cobblestone streets, beautiful cathedrals, but also markets, newer looking streets and a very nice park. Also, while you're there, I recommend checking out the Museum of Brittany, which holds interesting historical pieces from Brittany's Copper and Bronze Age all the way to the present. Rennes overall was nice, but kind of samey, whatever that means. 7.5 out of 10. After Rennes came Nantes, which unlike the cities we visited up until now, felt more like a student town. It had two beautiful cathedrals and a castle, but also felt more like an artsy city with the Jules Verne exhibition and a pretty cool natural history museum. It just felt like a definition of a modern European city, blending its old roots into the modern era, and that was nice, but not necessarily what I was looking for. So Nantes, 7 out of 10. From there, Poitiers was next. The only thing I knew about the city was that it was where Charles Martel stopped the Muslim expansion into Europe by defeating the Umayyad Caliphate in the 8th century. Well, maybe. The exact location of the battle is debated. Nonetheless, this was a very nice city too, kind of built on a hill surrounded by a river. Also, it was interesting to find out that its cathedral has one of the oldest stained glass windows, mural paintings, and choir stalls in the Hall of France. The town center looked nice, and overall the city had this small-time feel to it, but at the same time it felt again as a university city, kind of empty during summer. Hence Poitiers, also 7 out of 10. After Poitiers, we left the French countryside and headed for those big mountains called the Alps. Our destination was Grenoble, a modern city surrounded by mountains. From all the cities we've seen so far, Grenoble was the most business-esque looking city. By that I mean yes, it had a castle on top of a hill, and yes, it had a small old town, but overall it felt like a city where business gets done and then everyone goes skiing. I'm not opposed to this, and actually it would be great to live here as I'm a big sucker for huge mountains, which Grenoble has plenty, so purely due to my own bias, 8 out of 10 for Grenoble. After that, we crossed the Alps and headed towards Milan. We got there during the time of the heat wave, which was wrecking EU, and so with 40 degrees outside, we kind of just saw the highlights and left. The Parco Sempione, Castello Sforzesco, the cathedral along with the central plaza, etc. I would like to mention the cathedral, however, which had these ornate columns with statues on them, and I never seen this before and it looked pretty cool. Other than that, the drivers in Milan were pretty lax about their turn signals, which ticked me off a bit, so 6 out of 10 for Milan. The trip continued to Lago di Garda and a small island town called Sirmione, which was kind of like an Italian Lindau. It had pretty small cobblestone streets with amazing views of the lake and Alps around it. Sirmione used to be a popular vacation spot for rich Romans during the Roman era, and I can see why. It is very nice. But also during our visit there were just too many tourists around and it was very hot, so not complete 8.7 like Lindau, but a 8 out of 10. After that came Venice, the city built on water and one that is highly overrated by an aforementioned YouTuber. With that said, Venice is Venice. There's nothing like it around the world that compares to it. With its maniacally built confusing streets and small random plazas here and there, all combined with just canals everywhere, it is definitely a unique place that deserves checking out. Everyone usually says it smells bad, but I didn't smell anything overly bad. Plus, just everything you see is Venice. By which I mean many cities have old towns and then sprawl from there, but Venice as a whole is the old town, and that is just amazing. So overall, Venice gets a 8.9 out of 10. Lastly on our trip, we crossed the Alps once again towards Austria and its second largest city, Graz. Now, the best way to explain Graz is that it's a German-speaking Bratislava. From the old town streets to its buildings, everything just looks second-tier Austro-Hungarian, which makes sense as both cities' old towns were built in that era. However, what I have to recommend for people to check out if you're ever in Graz is the freaking ridiculous London Chic House, or however you say it. I swear, this museum has enough armor and weapons to fit out an entire army. So if you're ever in need of 15th to 18th century army supply, be sure to check out Graz. Overall, the city was nice but looked very familiar, so 7 out of 10. From Graz, we returned back to our starting point, hence concluding the summer trip. Hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to check out my main channel and maybe also subscribe to this one if you like random videos posted sporadically. My name is Laser, and see you next time.